Since the early days of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, official estimates from both government sources and the company, BP, have put the oil gushing into the Gulf of Mexico at a rate of 5,000 barrels per day. Most independent estimates have put the number much higher, and engineering professor Steve Worley testified to Congress on Wednesday that his analysis of recently released videos puts the flow at roughly 95,000 barrels per day, or 19 times the BP and government estimates, which have not been updated. On Tuesday, after requests from U.S. senators, BP released 4 new 5-minute-long videos of the leaks. These BP videos are the source of the 95,000 barrel per day estimate and other independent estimates. We spoke to journalists at McClatchy's DC bureau for an update on the situation. According to Renee Schoaf, it's possible that the reason we have to rely on such limited video analysis estimates is due to BP's control of information on the spill.
That the company involved, who is responsible under law for the spill and for the cleanup, also controls a lot of information about it and what the public is learning. And that's a little frustrating. BP says we've really focused on cleaning it up and trying to stop it, and we just have not focused on looking at how quickly that oil is flowing or to get a better idea of how much. And of course, the government has an estimate. They've had it since the early days of the spill of 5,000 barrels a day. But that's really based on satellites. And as we now know, a lot of this oil is deep in the water.
Congressman Ed Markey announced Wednesday that BP would release a live video stream of the well, which may lead to more precise independent measurements. Shashank Bengali has also been tracking the story. He points out that a naked-eye comparison of leak videos raises serious doubts about the BP and government estimates, given that we have videos of the leak both before and after BP's insertion of a tube that is bringing some oil to the surface.
BP said that they're now getting 2,000 barrels a day of oil siphoned away from the spill and stored into a tank. They're doing this by inserting a tube, and the tube sucks the oil up to the surface, and it's then separated from a tank. But if they're getting 2,000 barrels a day, and you see how much is actually still coming out, even with that tube, it makes you think that perhaps their estimate of 5,000 barrels a day leaking is way underestimated.
As the oil continues to pour out 5,000 feet below, Bengali is looking into the anglers who have been prohibited from fishing in the Gulf where the oil is spreading on the water's surface.
The National Oceanographic Administration, NOAA, they widened the no fishing zone in the Gulf to now cover about 19 or 20% of the entire Gulf of Mexico. It's a huge area.
And the timing couldn't be worse.
May is the start of shrimp and oyster season in the Gulf, so this is the time of year they'd be making most of their money, really, for the entire year. These are small independent people. They're pretty much mom and pop type operations. They're commercial fishermen who have licenses to fish, but they're not parts of big companies.
BP has opened a claim center to compensate for preliminary damages.
They're entitled to $5,000 per fisherman, and the problem is BP has put a number of requirements in place for the fishermen to get that money. And a lot of the requirements, lawyers say, are pretty onerous on the fishermen. They've got to produce tax records, boat licenses, expenses for their business. And lawyers are saying even the $5,000 that BP has agreed to pay isn't nearly the amount they'd get if they were really fishing as usual. But it's the initial amount they've agreed to pay, so they're going to go for that and then see how it goes from there.
Erica Bolstad has been covering the search for the cause of the original explosion and who's responsible for it.
The blowout preventers failed on this well. That was the final thing to keep this from blowing. But before you get to that point, somebody made a bad decision. Every engineer you talk to in Texas, Louisiana, people who have been in this industry for a long time, they all ask why the drilling mud, the hydraulic fluid that's used in the well, was displaced at the time that it was displaced with seawater before there was a final plug put into the well. That's been the big question. Why did that happen? And who is responsible for that decision? There are a lot of regulators that oversee offshore drilling in other states, including Alaska, where they've said that BP, the buck stopped with them. That was their job, to make sure that something like this didn't happen. And so any decision that was made was probably ultimately BP's decision or responsibility.
The month that has passed since the original explosion has been defined by increasingly dire forecasts and revelations about the severity of the disaster. Today, concern now extends to countries beyond the United States. Leslie Clark of the Miami Herald points out that Cuba is particularly worried about the situation, especially now that the oil appears destined for the so-called loop current in the Gulf.
The government in Cuba is concerned about it and have contacted some marine and oceanographers who they've worked with in the past years up here in the United States and asked them for some help, and was able to find out today too that the State Department has actually started talking with Cuba. So they called it low-level kind of technical talks about what might happen if the spill were to reach the island. And it's just sort of an interesting story because we have very frosty relations with Cuba. Fidel Castro, who still writes a column all the time, is never reluctant to sort of go after the Obama administration or go after any administration and criticize them, but they've been very reluctant to say anything on this oil spill because they have their own plans. They're very interested in exploring for oil off of their own shores.
While journalists and foreign governments deal with incomplete information, Bengali reports that the head of the U.S. Coast Guard raised alarm in testimony on Wednesday.
He's saying that this is a bigger spill than they'd ever planned for, that the Coast Guard, which is supervising this sort of massive cleanup, doesn't have the expertise or the amount of people or the plans in place to deal with it. And it was quite a stark description of the problem. From their standpoint, from the cleanup side, it's getting more difficult to contain what's already out there.